You should write a book. How to Offend Women in 5 Syllables or Less.
Quoting one of Clint Eastwood's characters that I don't care to fact-check, there are 2 types of people in this world. And following on from that, there are 2 types of animated films from the 90s. Ones that tried to copy Disney, and ones that didn't. And in the case of the former, there are 2 more types. Those that did it well, and those that, Poor Don Bluth has a film in either category, although thankfully the one that worked came second, so yay for growth.
What are you circling me? What were you, a vulture in another life?
Thumbelina is far from the only spectacular failure in Category A, with the other notable disaster being the insufferably average Equestria Camelot that at least had one good song.
And I will fly on my father's wings.
Anastasia, meanwhile, is sometimes considered the only film that tried to do the Disney princess formula and actually succeeded, and I used to hold similar feelings, but there is another childhood favourite that it turns out I held in my heart far longer than forever.
Far longer than forever.
The Swan Princess is a 1994 animated fairy tale that holds the distinction of being sabotaged at the box office due to Disney being infamously petty and re-releasing The Lion King to compete with it, but giving me plenty of reasons to be petty myself and brand that the one Renaissance film I do not like. Nonetheless, The Swan Princess did very well when it was released on home video, which is how I first saw it, and there were 2 more films that blew Disney's own direct-to-video sequels out of the water in terms of quality, save Cinderella 3, obviously.
I forbid you to take another step down these stairs!
Okay.
And then, after a whole decade, there have been an additional 9 sequels in CGI with none of the original cast returning, none of which I have seen and have no desire to. I spent the 2010s mocking the franchise or only considering it a guilty pleasure, with even one of my old blogs slating it being used as a source on its Wikipedia page. But in 2019, when it was time for the 25th anniversary, I sat down to watch it after a few years and lots of internal growth, and I just really enjoyed it. It's a cute little movie with a lot to like. I even got a little excited when I saw this pitch trailer for a live-action remake. But like Anastasia, this one has a bit of a history lesson behind its conception. The Swan Princess was created by Richard Rich, who, like Don Bluth, was a former Disney employee. In fact, he was director of The Fox and the Hound, the very film Don Bluth was working on when he chose to leave Disney. He was also one of the unfortunate directors on The Black Cauldron, whose failure was so disastrous it nearly saw the end of Disney's animation department altogether. He was set to direct their final Dark Age film, Oliver and Company, but was fired as part of damage control that resulted from The Black Cauldron's losses. But Don Bluth comes into the story again, as he had released films like The Secret of Nim, An American Tail, and The Land Before Time to pretty alright success away from the mouse. So Mr. Rich decided to also start his own studio that first did half-hour shorts animating passages from the Book of Mormon, no, not that one, before finally trying his hand at a feature.
I made a vow of everlasting love.
Says him, I wanted to do a fairy tale, and it had to have romance, a great love story. While it may seem that The Swan Princess was copying an established formula, take into account that the film was in production for 4 years. So with a 1994 release, it had to have only begun in 1990, only just after The Little Mermaid's release. And while I will go to my grave defending Ariel as a character, I will admit the romance is a tad underdeveloped. So at the time, the most recent animated fairy tale in memory was Sleeping Beauty, and that too kept the romance pretty simple. Prince meets princess in the forest, one conversation, one dance, one scheduling of a next meetup, and then that's it until his kiss wakes her up. This would modernize the idea of an animated fairy tale for a 1990s audience, but...
You're beautiful.
Thank you. But what else?
Rather than going with a slightly more recent story like The Little Mermaid, they went further back. Again, taking a nod to Tchaikovsky, as Sleeping Beauty had. Swan Lake is one of the most famous ballets in the world, and if the Nutcracker wasn't a Christmas tradition, it would probably be the only ballet anyone ever heard of, and it's often been called the best ballet in terms of movement. This is what Natalie Portman and Mila Kunis were training for in Black Swan, and the role is indeed an extremely challenging one, though it would not be performed by one dancer in every production as the movie tries to portray. We have Odette, a beautiful princess under the spell of an evil sorcerer Rothbart, where she is a swan by day and a girl by night, and can only be freed if one who has never loved before swears to love her forever. Which is awfully convenient, because along comes a Prince Siegfried who wishes he could marry for love. But true love doesn't conquer all, because Rothbart shows up at a royal ball with his daughter Odile, who is disguised to look like Odette, and she seduces him successfully enough for him to ignore the pleas from the real Odette outside, and he declares that he will marry Odile. This means that Odette will be trapped as a swan forever, and, heartbroken, she and Siegfried throw themselves into the lake to be together in death. But at least this kills Rothbart and frees her handmaidens from their curse, so a trolley problem with good results. Whoever is cast in the role of Odette, best known as the White Swan, is also usually cast as Odile, best known as, you guessed it, the Black Swan. So she gets to play both the ingenue and the femme fatale in the one production. It's a very exciting and interesting way to explore the nature of duality, with some Freudian themes in there too, of Siegfried being attracted to Odette's purity, but also being drawn to Odile's fire and sexuality, in effect deconstructing the Madonna whore complex. And if you have the same dancer playing both roles, it further emphasizes that in real life, we can all be both the White and Black Swan. Great material for a psychological horror movie in my introduction to Mila Kunis, but a surprising choice for an animated family film.
You'll live, Odette. The vow I made was for you.
So the first order of business is to change the ending to a happily ever after where love does indeed conquer all. And this isn't too far off base, since the original ballet was supposedly meant to have a happy ending too, and there have been other productions doing that. So now the prince defeats Rothbart in a way that gets points for effort, but you're not topping Philip slaying a dragon in my eyes. With the desire to make a sweeping romance the primary focus, there's a backstory added, where Odette and her prince, now renamed Derek, have known each other since childhood and were going to be married when Derek really screwed up the proposal, and we will get to that. So the ballet and fairy tale's first meeting between them is actually their reunion after Odette has been missing for an unspecified period of time. Odette's handmaidens are removed, and she instead has the typical animal sidekicks who engage in comedically anachronistic behaviour, and also Odile is no longer Rothbart's daughter, but a hag minion called Bridget who gets redeemed off-screen. They also add in a backstory to explain Rothbart's capture of Odette, removing the earliest version of the ballet's reasoning, where it was actually Odette's wicked stepmother who was the real villain and Rothbart was just working for her.
Everything you own, everything you love, will be mine.
Here, he's planning to take over the kingdom, is banished by Odette's father, and during said exile, he learns to transform himself into a beast called the Great Animal, and it's then he kidnaps Odette and kills her father, putting her under the enchantment to try and get her to marry him so he can rule the kingdom legally.
Take it then. You have enough power.
Nah, tried that already.
I can sometimes get snarky at this movie, but I'll say it right now. The second that music starts and those title cards... Goosebumps. So, shall we? I mentioned beforehand that the Swan Princess was in production for 4 years, which is almost as long as it took to get Pocahontas done, but of course that had the backing of Disney and a budget of $55 million, whereas the Swan Princess was made independently, with $45 million in total, raised gradually over that period. It also has the distinction of being the last animated feature film to use the traditional method, with cells, ink and paint. Disney had switched to a digital system for The Rescuers Down Under and Beauty and the Beast, and you can definitely see the differences. But while it's natural to compare any animated movie to one from the top animation studio in the world, I really quite like the art style for the Swan Princess. It's very soft and innocent, as fitting a fairy tale where romance takes priority, but with plenty of edge to avoid feeling too drippy. There are so many great individual backdrops that I will just happily pause the movie to appreciate, like the ballroom in Derek's castle, which I'm very glad we keep coming back to. And when you're doing a fairy tale, it's really important to have sequences that are just there to be beautiful, sometimes in an understated way, and other times in a spectacular one. An example of the former is this wordless introduction to Swan Lake, where we tilt up the waterfall and move forward to reveal the castle by the water, and then pan right. An example of the latter is of course the memorable sequence of a transformed Odette flying towards Derek in the forest, passing through the rays of the setting sun. The animators were also challenged by the fact that over half the film takes place during the night, since that's when Odette is human, and so they had to find a way to make the colours still be believably vibrant, and in my opinion, they definitely succeeded. The nighttime scenes are among the most beautifully designed, especially Odette's transformations. We have some nice character designs too, and a deliberate attempt to differentiate from the Disney house style, with even the background characters in more crowded scenes being very distinct. I also quite shamelessly love the amalgamation of various time periods with regards to the costumes, with Queen Uberta blending a medieval-style bodice with a Victorian-era bustle skirt, which is oh so appropriate for a character who is the living embodiment of the term extra.
Open the door! Chamberlain.
And there are so many sequences that I just have to praise in their effectiveness, with Odette's transformation in front of Derek and their reunion having exactly the kind of catharsis that Belle and the Prince finally kissing prompts, which is a big plus in a story where romance is the big focus and the lovers have to spend most of the movie apart.
Hello, Derek.
On the most recent watch, I was also really struck by the sequence of Swan Odette lying to Derek's castle and repeatedly trying to get his attention before he makes his vow to the wrong woman. It still has the same tension I felt when I watched it as a kid, with all the hope spots and red herrings having the desired effect. I found myself so lost in the story I was subconsciously praying for Odette to get through to him. The same way us Titanic fans want the ship to miss the iceberg whenever we watch. And the movie does not nerf Odette's death scene, where she dies right there in Derek's arms. And I can't help but note this equally heart-wrenching exchange in Tangled, and wondering if they had an eye on how the Swan Princess did things.
You were my new dream.
And you were mine.
I know. I love you, Derek.
And here, you have to get through a tense 2-minute battle with the great animal before the resurrection happens. Can said battle hope to top the sheer awesomeness of Prince Philip fighting Maleficent's dragon form? Of course not. But this moment of the earlier game of Catch and Fire becoming a Chekhov's skill segueing into this cut? I definitely felt something that I didn't feel when Anastasia killed Rasputin, which is how you know the movie has crafted a villain whose downfall you enjoy. Hairs on the back of my spine all around. But of course, I may have said that Anastasia may not have worked as a fairy tale, but it was damn fine as a musical, which the Swan Princess also is. So how does that do? As said before, The Swan Princess was an independent film financed through multiple years of cutting deals and basically begging individual banks to invest. It didn't have the backing of a massive studio like Disney, or indeed Fox or Warner Brothers, so don't expect any true heavy hitters in the song department like Once Upon a December, at least not until the second film.
I want the magic of love again.
But that doesn't mean it doesn't work as a musical.
So happy you could come, so happy to be here.
The first song is This Is My Idea, a fun 6-minute number covering Derek and Odette's first summer right through to adulthood, checking in with them at 3 different stages of their lives, as well as the perspectives of their matchmaking parents and various servants and villagers playing a sort of Greek chorus, and also dropping the most relatable line ever from an animated musical.
And with some luck their marriage may result in lower taxes.
The comedy then gives way to straight-up romance as Derek and Odette finally fall in love for real, and the song also becomes a romantic duet, with the climax blending that with the Greek chorus world-building affirming everything.
This is my idea.
This song accomplishes a lot, and not only because it properly introduces 5 prominent characters and covers close to 2 decades of their lives without feeling like the important stuff got skipped over. World building and character motivations and development are conveyed very casually, with William and Uberta either being clueless or calculated in forcing the children together, and the citizens of both kingdoms also being eager for them to be united, juxtaposing with Derek and Odette really not liking each other, but also subtly building towards their eventual traction in the teenage portions of the song.
I think you really sorta like her.
And their eventual falling in love is so seamless that you feel like you've experienced the last few years with them in a way that instantly makes the romance believable, which I'll get into later. This was arguably the most important song in the musical, or at least had the toughest job, and it was done very well. But then the big romantic duet had to come so soon after.
Derek!
Remember how I slated Thumbelina for expecting us to immediately care about the romance between Cornelius and the title character when their big romantic duet is only the second song in the movie? mere moments after they first met, and they don't share the screen until the climax. The Swan Princess is a far better movie than Thumbelina, but it runs into something of a problem where Far Longer Than Forever is coming so soon after This Is My Idea. Paraphrasing old Clint once again, there are two types of romantic duets in musicals. More specifically, these types of simple coming-of-age fairy tales that are accessible to children, the falling in love song and the love-affirming one. The former covers the couple catching feelings in the beginning of the attraction, and the latter confirms that they are indeed endgame. For example, while Colours of the Wind in Pocahontas is mainly about schooling John Smith on how ignorant he is and showing how Powhatan culture is just as valid, it also serves as a representation of the two falling for each other after the conflict over John's views. And while they end the song closer to the same page, Pocahontas isn't immediately receptive to being with him, and we need a longer chunk of story to properly see how he's changed his views and she's come around to the idea of being with him. I'm cheating a bit by including If I Never Knew You in the discussion, since it is a deleted song, but that is the one that affirms the love they feel for each other, with the tragic tone of it also foreshadowing that these are star-crossed lovers who won't end up together. These types of musicals don't need to have both, as Aladdin just develops the attraction through dialogue, with the love-affirming song coming after they've shared a connection and Jasmine has caught on to Aladdin being the man she met in the marketplace. Anastasia meanwhile has no love-affirming song, with Vlad's little solo telegraphing that Dimitri and Anya are falling for each other, and the only musical reference to it afterwards being Dimitri's brief solo when Paris holds the key to your heart. A musical can have them close together, since Beauty and the Beast has the falling in love song being immediately followed by the love-affirming one, but both of them following how the main conflict keeping these lovers from falling for each other has been solved, and still covering significant ground in the relationship. Derek and Odette fall in love at the end of This Is My Idea, but then Odette breaks off the engagement because she thinks Derek only wants her for her beauty, and they never interact again until Derek finds her. And while it's implied several months or possibly even a couple of years have passed by the time we start Far Longer Than Forever, Odette's sudden switch to declaring her love for Derek feels a bit jarring. We instantly understand Derek's perspective because we get all these scenes conveying how he does love Odette for more than her looks. But Odette's feelings do kind of come out of nowhere. While she could logically have hoped that Derek might come and rescue her, remember that the last time she saw this guy, she broke it off with him when he gave her the impression he saw her as just another pretty face. Odette's change in attitude feels unexpected because we didn't get as much time with her on this particular topic.
I need to know that he loves me for just being me.
So while the implications are obviously that Odette decided to have faith in Derek in between when she's kidnapped and when the song starts, this is the sort of thing we shouldn't have to headcanon our way around, and all we needed was a line or two that Odette knows Derek has been searching for her, which would tell her he did indeed love her for more than her beauty. Now, the song itself is still a banger, and it focuses more on sweet rather than spectacular, which makes the gripes I have easier to sidestep than the many I have with Let Me Be Your Wings from Thumbelina.
Swear that I'll be true.
I swear that I'll be true.
The choice to have the romantic ballad be what we call a distant duet is also a good one, especially since they'd already shared a duet in person. We tend to go on more about the princess's singing performance, but it has to be said that Howard McGillin really knocks it out of the park in this song especially.
As constant as a star.
I already sang the praises of Liz Callaway, who's dubbing for her first of many 90s heroines, and for those wondering why she's dubbing Michelle Nicastro, who played Eponine in Les Mis on Broadway, they apparently decided her singing was too pop and not princess enough, which is even stranger considering she does her own singing in the sequels and gets the best song in the franchise.
Give me a magic wand to wave.
But there is another song in between This Is My Idea and Far Longer Than Forever, which is Practice, Practice, Practice. And it's a comedy song providing some levity after establishing Odette's curse, where Derek is training relentlessly to the point that his counselor Rogers has the band dress up as animals for target practice, while implying that Uberto wants him to move on and marry someone else. So it's both plot relevant and quite fun, with plenty of animal-themed puns based on what the musicians are dressed as, which anyone who knows me can guess I'd give out gold stars based on that alone.
And I'm the lion's share.
And there's this.
Not you, Wesley, you're a rabbit.
Rogers, have you seen Watership Down? Then we have No Fear, sung by Odette and her animal friends as they decide to infiltrate Rothbart's castle for a map so the damsel can undistress herself and fly to Derek's kingdom.
Our backs are to the wall.
No fear!
Now, I am far from an expert on musicals, since I've never even seen anything related to, say, Phantom of the Opera, but I don't believe I've ever seen a musical where one song represents a covert heist of the villain's lair.
How about the kiss for love?
No
Fear.
This is another fun song with some clever wordplay, and this line especially made me giggle on the most recent watch.
We have all the courage we require.
Take it from a frequent flyer.
I do not know why I was so hard on this movie's songs once upon a time. It may not have the play on a loop soundtrack of, say, Pocahontas or anything scored by Ashman and Menken, but it is more than competent as a musical. In fact, the next song ended up becoming my favourite when I rewatched to research this video.
These royal highnesses all have pluses, they've no minuses.
Princesses on Parade, performed as part of the entertainment for the ball that Odette is supposed to attend, where Derek is introduced to a bunch of gals who never got sat down for the talk that first impressions are everything. Sung by Davis Gaines, who is also playing the title role in Phantom of the Opera at the time, it's done in the style of what we call a Busby Berkeley number, named after one of the most influential choreographers in terms of elaborate musical set pieces, especially when utilising the advantages film had over stage. And this does likewise with the advantages animation has over live action. They had this one choreographed and performed for reference, and it is one of the best animated scenes in the film. It's also quite important from a thematic point of view, since the emotional through line of the movie's romance is to not prioritise looks over substance. While we already knew that Derek didn't just like Odette because she was a pretty face, this number delivers on its title and literally parades a bunch of princesses in front of him who were all looks and no personality besides throwing themselves at the prince. We see that Derek is spoiled for choice, and yet all he does throughout the song is look around waiting for Odette. So yay for a musical number that can be fun and thematically relevant all in one.
Princesses on parade.
Oh, and there's also a villain song called No More Mr. Nice Guy that I really don't like, and I feel even less warmth towards it than In the Dark of the Night from Anastasia. While Rothbart could have used a villain song, I don't think it worked, and it's reinforcing my bias that only Disney can make animated villain songs work. Well, them and Equestria Girls.
Nothing can stop us now.
But as well as being a musical, this is also a princess movie, so how does our non-Disney dame hold up? If I were ranking all the princess heroines from this era or these types of movies together with the Disney ones, my list would go Ariel, Jasmine, Pocahontas, Aurora, and then...
I will never be yours, you creature!
Odette is a very interesting anomaly for being a princess created after the women's movement and during the girl power era when feisty, proactive heroines were the norm. Since outside of Disney, Anastasia portrayed the titular Grand Duchess as a street-smart, acid-tongued ballbuster who kills Rasputin herself, and Quest for Camelot is about a tomboyish young woman who wants to be a knight at the round table rather than a princess. But Swan Lake is a damsel in distress story. Like Sleeping Beauty, you can't make the story work if you don't have a princess captured by an evil sorcerer and put under an enchantment who needs to be saved by the prince. And we as a society have spent the last 2 decades demonizing the damsel in distress as one of the most harmful tropes in existence, with even the word damsel being used as a lazy pejorative when it literally just means a young unmarried woman. Ain't nothing wrong with being a damsel, unless we're saying remaining unmarried is a problem. Joking aside, the Swan Princess is a shining example of how to do a damsel in distress story well, showing that a trope isn't inherently bad unless it's overused. Odette is also the rare princess we get to follow throughout her life. First meeting her as a child, still looking in on her as a preteen, and then a teenager, and finally as a grown woman. It used to be a bit of a complaint that she is a feisty tomboy when she's younger and more typically feminine when she grows up, but I don't think she necessarily lost or traded in what made her unconventional. She just got smarter about the right way to apply that side of herself when she also has to be a public figure as a princess and eventual queen. Like, at the end of this visit, she's able to be a perfect lady in public while covertly getting back at Derek for slingshotting a tomato at her. As an adult, she grows into an archetype that we call silk hiding steel. Elegant, ladylike and graceful, but with a hidden core of steel who won't be outsmarted or intimidated. And that's demonstrated perfectly by how Rothbart underestimates her.
really starting to bug me.
I should think you'd be used to it by now.
He kidnaps a young woman and places her under a life-changing enchantment specifically to torture her into bending to his will, thinking that he can command Odette to give him what he wants. And she's having none of it.
But someday, I'm gonna boil over!
Go ahead then, but I'll never give you my father's kingdom.
Rothbart's plan is for her to be a puppet queen who will do as he says. And what's interesting is that the curse is designed so that it can't be broken by Odette herself. She needs someone else to save her. She's obviously the type of person who would have freed herself by now already if she were able to, so really, this part of the story is about a powerful man entrapping a strong woman and forcing her into a situation where she has to be subservient to escape, also implying that he doesn't believe anyone could ever love Odette enough to rescue her. And what animal does he turn her into?
Swan.
Swans are of course associated with beauty, grace and purity, but their wings can break human bone and they are one bird you do not want to mess with. So Odette rather accurately represents this duality, being a beautiful ladylike princess who rebels against her captor and refuses to bend to his will.
If you want to stop me, you'll have to kill me.
And of course, the movie's main theme is...
It's not what it seems.
I really like Michelle Nicastro's work, and she helps elevate Odette into being one of the great non-Disney princesses of her generation, with the right amount of sweetness and gentleness, balanced with the fire and passion to make her feel three-dimensional. And hey, we actually have a princess who calls it off with a man she genuinely loves when she thinks all he cares about is her looks.
Is beauty all that matters to you?
But that's a good enough segue to... Now, with this being a more modern Swan Lake that's feminist adjacent, the Swan Princess raises some questions about love and what makes a relationship work. After growing up and realizing they are in love after all, Derek calls for the marriage immediately, but Odette becomes concerned when it seems beauty is all that he cares about, and breaks things off when he says this immortal line.
What else is there?
And boy, Derek, did you drop the ball. But I think he gets an unfair amount of shit from people who take this scene a bit too literally.
She says, is beauty all that matters? And you say, what else is there?
General consensus on the internet is that the Swan Princess makes a statement and promptly forgets it, since after her kidnapping, Odette is suddenly singing sweeping ballads about how she hopes the man she broke it off with is coming to rescue her. But let's examine it a little more.
What else did you want him to say?
Odette is faced with an arranged marriage to a man she has fallen in love with, but asks said man to tell her what he values about her beyond physical beauty before she decides whether or not she'll spend the rest of her life with him. Fairy tales are usually about beautiful people falling in love or getting rewarded with an attractive love interest after making it through a tough life. Fiction in general is like this, since it's very rare to have a scenario where the female love interest is actually plain, reinforcing the idea that physical beauty is a must when picking a partner. Odette is likely well aware that looks are fleeting, and she's eventually going to age and not look the same as she does now, so she'd better be married to someone who loves other things about her.
But what else?
Odette doesn't necessarily fall out of love with Derek and snap back to wanting him once she's been imprisoned. She doesn't turn down the proposal because he's offended her, but because she had fallen in love with him for the person he'd become, hoped he'd done the same, and was heartbroken that it didn't seem that way. The film admittedly could have used a transition point to bring us from A to B and make it clearer, but the clue is in Odette's lines at the end of This Is My Idea.
I see inside him and my doubts are gone.
Odette is looking beyond appearances and falling in love with him as a person. Derek is focusing on physical beauty, and that is why Odette is the static character that prompts development in Derek.
You must make a vow of everlasting love.
I make it. It's all I've ever wanted.
It's not that he only cares about her beauty, more so that he's unable to verbalize the deeper stuff.
You must see something other than Odette's beauty.
Oh, of course I do, Rogers.
He already knows that he loves Odette for more than her beauty, but because he's so hung up on looks, he can't express exactly what he loves about her beyond that.
I don't know how to say it.
And the Black Swan plot twist from the original ballet ties into that. Derek knows that there is something different about Odette when she shows up, but is ultimately fooled by the disguise. This woman looks like Odette, and he takes that at face value, instead of looking deeper past the hints that it's an imposter. It's Derek demonstrating once again that he's valuing appearances above everything else.
A vow stronger than all the powers of the earth.
A public declaration of love in front of the kingdom is an example of Derek prioritizing the appearance of proving his love. Contrast this to his battle with Rothbart, which takes place in a remote lake with no apparent witnesses. Here, Derek is not making a show of trying to prove his love for Odette. He's actively proving it by willing to fight a monster in the hopes of saving her life. And it's only after he's defeated Rothbart that he speaks about what he really loves about Odette.
I love you. Your kindness and courage. I always have.
This part was added in after test audiences found Derek too unsympathetic, but it's still a nice moment all the same.
Sorry, Hans. Why don't you take a few days off?
Even without that line, it's clear that Derek loves Odette as a person. If he were only interested in physical beauty, he wouldn't spend all this time searching for her, or training to be ready to fight the great animal. He wouldn't run out of a ball full of plenty of other beautiful women who were already throwing themselves at him once he realizes she's in trouble. And he wouldn't fight a giant monster to save her life.
I won't let her die!
Despite the movie's title referring to Odette, it's really the story of a young man who falls in love, messes up big time, and nearly loses everything, and earns his redemption by rising to the occasion when he gets his second chance. Okay, technically third, but still. We have a children's movie from 1994 spelling it out for the audience that relationships aren't just about looks. Even though the couple are conventionally attractive, but still, again. And honestly, I'm way more on board with that than the amount of times we see movies present our flawed male lead as a womanizer who only changes once he meets the right person.
Look, I'm gonna be totally honest with you. I forgot you're here.
And the sequels even show how happily ever after doesn't mean it's smooth sailing from then on, examining what to do when the honeymoon period is over in the second movie, and the importance of trust and communication in the third. So one could argue that the happy ending for Odette in this case isn't necessarily getting a handsome prince or breaking the spell, but learning that Derek is indeed everything she'd hoped he would be, and honestly, that's f***ing beautiful.
There you have it. Everlasting love.
I did want to include a section tipping the hat of the supporting cast, since, as movies like The Hunchback of Notre Dame and The Princess and the Frog demonstrate, not even Disney can deliver a great ensemble of supporting players all the time.
Get moving, Slowpoke.
Slowpoke?
Odette's animal sidekicks are all genuinely funny and feel like an integral part of the story, with Speed being my absolute favourite.
I shall return to my throne.
Don't forget to write.
And Stephen Wright's deadpan delivery being on point.
I think I pulled a muscle.
I think I can probably thank this movie for the turtle being number 2 on my list of top 6 animals.
The only thing you're gonna turn is red.
And Queen Uberta is just magnificent.
You take me to Derek's or I'll throw you out like a jar of bad mayonnaise!
That statement is mainly earned from her expanded screen time in the second movie, with this line that was iconic in my house.
Alright, don't bring me lunch. But my birthday dinner better be awfully special!
But she's great in her debut installment too.
Queen's coming through here. Excuse me.
But I think you'll probably remember from my introduction that the Swan Princess had to go head-to-head with The Lion King at the box office, or more specifically, a tactical re-release by Disney designed to sink it, as they did with Anastasia. And unfortunately, it didn't have the backing of a major studio to at least break even. It didn't even gross 10 million. And it can be pretty sad to read Richard Rich's statement on just what it felt like to realize your debut feature that you spent 4 years making independently was going to be remembered as a failure. That night, I was feeling really, really bad. I don't know if I've ever felt that bad in my whole life. And I was getting hourly reports of how it was doing across the country, and my wife turned to me and said, "It doesn't matter, you made a great picture." And once she said that, it all changed. Critics also couldn't help but compare it to Disney, since, if you remember, this was before Pocahontas came out, and the mouse was on a roll with a string of critical hits. Most reviews tended to say it couldn't hope to compete with the Renaissance films, but it had its charm nonetheless.
Oh, bonjour, madame. The ladies still fall for me.
Time, however, has been very kind to it, and in 2019, they even had a little celebration for the 25th anniversary, and I can thank that for finally making it socially acceptable to declare that the Swan Princess is good, actually, and its second and third films, who at least don't have animation quality that makes me want to claw my eyes out like most of the direct-to-video Disney sequels.
No one spoils my birthday!
I choose to believe that the franchise ends after the one with Zelda, since seeing the franchise in CGI and without Michelle Nicastro as Odette just isn't for me, although I'm sure they have their fans. There's a real charm to this franchise, or its original 3 installments that I can't quite describe.
To the rescue, mademoiselle!
It doesn't seem like a soulless knockoff, although the Disney influence is very apparent. And the story has a lot more to say than you'd think. I'd rank it above some of the Renaissance films like Hercules, Tarzan, and yes, The Lion King.
He said we were the enemy.
But that's definitely a bias/preference issue. And hell, I'd rank it above Anastasia too, since my lack of love for Rasputin pushes it down ever so slightly on the list. So I salute Richard Rich and the entire crew of this movie that has been part of my life since before I can remember. Disney may have won the battle, but you won the war. And of course, I have to say, Swan Princess, far longer than forever, I'll hold you in my heart.